You're listening to the Tel Aviv Review here on TLV1. I am Gilad Halpern. Welcome back. I'm now joined here by Nachum Shiloh, who's about to complete his PhD at Tel Aviv University's Department of History. His research focuses on the history of Saudi elites in the first half of the 20th century. In our mind, mine at least, Saudi Arabia, even today, has been an ultra-conservative, almost medieval society with a clear hierarchy and a coercive leadership, but it turns out that it's not exactly the case. Hello, Nachum, and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Hello, good morning.
So the starting point of your research is the year 1901. What did Saudi Arabia look like back then?
Well, in 1901, there was no Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, as we know it as a kingdom, was established in 1932. In 1901, King Abdulaziz ibn Saud, the first king of Saudi Arabia, began his journey to retake the capital Riyadh from the Ottoman Empire and its proxies. So in 1901, in late 1901, along with several dozens, no more than 70 people, went from Kuwait, where the Saudi family was in exile, to take
because they were from Riyadh originally.
Yes, to reclaim Riyadh, and they managed to do it in January of 1902. So it was a city-state. There was no Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, in its border that we know today, was consolidated in these borders only in 1925.
Right.
After taking all the regions, the Eastern Province, the Hijaz, the Asir Province in the south, the northern provinces.
So there were different provinces and different kingdoms that were under different rulers. Give us a quick overview of what was the situation before the reunification of Saudi Arabia under Ibn Saud's rule.
Let's say on the turn of the 20th century, the Arabian Peninsula was ruled or managed by several either states or chiefdoms. Let's say the whole the Eastern Province was under Ottoman direct rule. The Ottoman military presence and the civil administration in the Eastern Province. The Western Province, the Hijaz, where the holiest city of Islam are, Mecca and Medina, and also other cities like Jeddah and Taif, was also under Ottoman rule. And after, from 1916 to 1925, there was an independent kingdom which was the Hijazi Kingdom. Mm-hmm. This was ruled by the Sharif Hussein, who is the great-grandfather of King Abdullah of Jordan.
Right, the Hashemites.
The Hashemites, yes. The southern provinces were, let's say, in the southwestern province of Asir was also an independent chiefdom, which was ruled by a local ruler and influenced both by the Ottomans and the Hijazis. The northern provinces, including the Riyadh, they were under the control of the Rashidi dynasty, which was a proxy of the Ottoman Empire. And of course, the Rub al-Khali desert was no man's land.
But after the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire, they were independent.
Well, we have to make things in order. In 1913, a year before the World War I, while the Ottoman Empire was still existing, Ibn Saud and his forces, they took the Eastern Province. They conquered the Eastern Province, of course, because of the fact that the Ottomans were occupied with other wars, like in the Balkans, like in North Africa. So the Ottomans lost this province. The decade before that, Ibn Saud and its allied its Saudi forces and other elites, they took the Najdi desert, Riyadh, and the northern part of the northern provinces. Uh-huh. The Hijaz, as I said, it was when the Arab revolt in 1916 broke out. The Ottomans lost it to the rival Arab forces, and the kingdom of the Hijaz was established.
Okay, what was the nature of the relationship of Ibn Saud, the father of the nation, with the local and regional leaders of the provinces that you just described?
It was a rivalry, hostility. Let's say, if in order to understand it, we have to go back to the 18th and 19th century. In the 18th century, there was in the 18th and 19th century, there was two Saudi states, the first Saudi state and the second Saudi state, which existed each of these states existed for, let's say, 6 or 7 decades, and was from several reasons were disintegrated. In 1891, the rule of the Saudi family, or let's say the second Saudi state, was disintegrating, and they lost Riyadh to the Rashidis, to the Rashidi dynasty, which, as I said, was a proxy of the Ottoman Empire. And let's say the relations with the Hijaz were also tense, and were rivalry because the Hijazis are not Wahhabis, and for decades, even for centuries. Let's say the beginning from the late 18th century, the Hijazis and the Wahhabis were rivals, and there were wars and confrontations.
That had a religious nature?
Yes.
Tell us a bit about the religious component in all this.
The Wahhabis are, let's say, a very dogmatic branch of Sunni Islam. The Wahhabis began at, let's say, the mid-18th century when Sheikh Muhammad Abdul Wahhab joined the forces with the first ruler of the first Saudi state, Muhammad ibn Saud, in another city called El Dir'iyah, which was then the capital of the first Saudi state. And the Wahhabiyah is very dogmatic, saying that it looks at Islam and on the application of Sunni Islam in a very strict way. It means that it's called oneness. It's called in Arabic Tawheed. Tawheed means that you should worship only Allah and ask for help only from Allah, and you should, let's say, be very strict about religious ceremonies and religious behavior. And there is no leniency. There is no compromise. There is no Wahhabiyah is very strict, and everybody who violates the rules of this issue should be punished for infidelity, for, let's say,
was Ibn Saud the standard bearer of Wahhabism from the very early stages?
Ibn Saud?
Yeah.
Well, Ibn Saud, yes. But we have to make a distinction. Ibn Saud and the all Saudi families, there was, from the first days of the first Saudi state from the 18th century, there was an alliance, a political religious alliance between the Saud dynasty and between the religious elites led by Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab from the mid-18th century and his descendants. And this formula of, let's say, in Arabic it's called ulama wa umara, was applied in first and second Saudi state as let's say a Swiss watch.
Okay. Very, very accurate.
Very, very accurate with several different characteristics between the first and second Saudi state, but there were mainly two elites: ruling elite of the led by the Saud dynasty, and religious elite led by the religious sheikhs, mainly from the Al Sheikh family. The Al Sheikh family are the descendants of Sheikh Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab. For example, let's say in the Hijaz, there were other applications of Sunni Islam which were not Wahhabi. There were Maliki, Shafi'i, Ibn Hanafi schools which were applied.
So when I'm just trying to move forward here for a second, maybe jump forward. So the history of the elites, the different locuses around the Saudi government during the phases of its formation that you focus your research on. Tell us a bit about that, about the fact that they, about the plurality of the elites and their relationship with the central government.
Okay.
But either the political one of Ibn Saud or the religious one, or both.
Okay. In my PhD dissertation, I challenged the perception of two elites, religious and ruling elite. After studying the material thoroughly, and I noticed that other elites existed, and there was, let's say, the Saudi state was evolving not as a tango dance between only two elites, but as a mosaic of many elites. I counted even in the early stages of the Saudi state, let's say in the first decade of the 20th century, first and second decades of the 20th century, I detected no less than 5 elites. And in the decades that follow this period, let's say in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, there was as many as 15 or 20 elites. Elites and sub-elites.
How were they divided? Geographically, or was it according to some sort of social divisions?
Both. Both. Let's say from every region in which the Saudi forces took militarily in the first decades, 2 decades of the 20th century, let's say between 1902 and 1925, in every region there were communities, population, and of course elites. In the eastern province, you had the Shia elites. The region is populated mainly by Shia Muslims, and there were Shias and there were Sunnis, which acted, let's say, in favor of the Saudi state. So the Shia elites were alienated by the Saudi states after the retake of after it was conquered. In the Hijazi, there were lots of religious and economic elites, religious elites mainly in Mecca, economic elites mainly in Jeddah. And in the other provinces, in every province that the Saudis entered militarily and took it by force, there were elites. So there were leaders, there were community.
And what did they do? Did they take them under their control? Did they find them and eliminated them? Did they deport them? Did they force them out? I mean, I'm particularly interested in the Shiite component here because we all know today about the great rivalry between the Sunnis and the Shiites in the Arab world. And of course, this Sunni camp is led by Saudi Arabia. So was it as present back in, I don't know, 100 years ago?
Yes. In 1913, 102 years ago, when the Saudis conquered the eastern province, they alienated the Shia elites. Let's say the golden age of the Shia elites ended when the Ottoman Empire vanished. When the Ottoman Empire was kicked out of this province by the Saudis.
Yeah.
Let's say the Shia elites suffered from the Saudi occupation because they were considered like second and third class citizen. All the major positions were taken by the guys from Riyadh and by Sunni elites, which were living in the eastern province side by side by the Shia elites. There were even incidents of massacres and harassments of the Shia elites, and many of the let's say leading figures in the Shia elites, they preferred to flee. To go to Bahrain or to go to Iraq, to join other Shia communities. Those who were left behind were hunted, were harassed, and in the eastern province, the Saudis alienated the existing elites. It was not the case in the other provinces. On the contrary, in the Hijaz, the Saudis have no other choice but to co-opt the Sunni elites because they needed the merchants, they needed the religious elites of Mecca and Jeddah, and it was easier. Let's Wahhabiyya. Let's not forget that Wahhabiyya is considering the Shia elites as infidels. If you are a Shia, you are sometimes worse than a Jew or a Christian.
Wow, that's terrible.
Yes, for the Shias, of course.
Sure, of course, yeah. I want to go now to another element and perhaps a game changer, and that is, of course, oil. So when it was discovered and became one of the major exports of the young kingdom, and it had really far-reaching ramifications.
Yes.
How did this change the state of affairs that Ibn Saud labored to achieve in his conquests?
Well, first of all, for the first time, oil made the Saudi family powerful and rich. Before oil was discovered, let's not forget that oil was discovered in Saudi Arabia. Let's say the first barrel of oil was produced in Saudi Arabia no sooner than 1938. only in 1938. Before that, the kingdom had to import oil from other sources.
That's funny.
Yes, that's funny, considering that Saudi Arabia is the second largest producer in the world today.
Yeah.
It was bypassed by the United States, by the way.
Oh, yeah?
Yes, in 2014.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So oil made the Saudi ruling family much more powerful and much more affluent. Let's say if until the late 1930s, the Saudi families was very dependent on other elites, let's say the merchants elite of the Hijaz. Now the game was changed.
Yeah.
The Saudi family gained power. They built palaces. They were in control on all oil revenues, which entered the states, and they joined the alliances.
So did it contribute to the centralization of power in Saudi Arabia to the extent that it was a real game changer?
Yes, very much so. Because up until then, the dependency of the Saudi ruling elite caused this elite to make concessions to other elites. Let's say for the merchants of the Hijaz and to other elites, to the religious elites. Once the oil revenues entered Saudi Arabia, the ruling family could apply more efficiently the divide and rule game, and to create let's say a patron-client network in which the Saudi ruling elite, let's say when I am referring to ruling elite, it's not only Ibn Saud, it's the Ibn Saud, his sons, his cousins, all the ruling, let's say the ruling elite. They managed to become the super tribe or the super elite of the Saudi state.
And you said that this is thanks to oil largely.
Mainly because
so
of
right
oil.
Right now in the post-industrial era, whatever you want to call it, now that oil is really the major player there. So have we seen really the eradication of those other elites that were to an extent hostile and rival to Ibn Saud, and thanks to it he really managed to impose his authoritarian rule?
Well, if you're referring to
let me rephrase that. Do we see in today's Saudi Arabia any remainder, any relics of these other elites that you studied in your historical account?
The elites did not vanish. Mm-hmm. They exist, and the Saudi royal family and the Saudi ruling elite still have to consider their opinions and their let's say and their trends, and it's not like it's being showed or imagined as a one ruler which controls everything. You know, Saudi Arabia, it has elites, it has forces, it has underground forces, and let's say for example, Saudi Arabia is undergoing for several decades a process of privatization. And in this process, privatization and sharing of political power. And in this process, it's not the king and the let's say the most important princess are in charge, but other elites comes and show. Let's say if you take for example Adel El-Jubeir, the new foreign minister. He is the first minister or a foreign minister who is not a prince.
Not from the Saud family.
He's not from the Saud family. He represents other elites, other educated elites.
Westernized?
Westernized. He was in the last 8 years. He was the Saudi ambassador to the United States, and he had his education in the United States. And
but even that elite, that family, is still very loyal to the Saud family.
Yes,
I mean you don't see like any potential of regime change or anything that might endanger the authority of the Saud court.
Well, and nobody can know. The recent events of the Arab Spring showed us that nobody can be a prophet and say what will happen. You're talking about scenarios and possibilities. Relatively to other Arab states, the Saudi kingdom is stable. However, we should not forget that the Saudi kingdom is let's say includes or consisted of provinces and elites. Yeah. It's not let's say it has the potential of under certain conditions of having problems or disintegrating, but it's not something
it's much more heterogeneous than we may think. or we tend to think.
Yes.
All right. And Nachum Shiloh, I'm afraid this is all we have time for, but you are a historian of Saudi Arabia at Tel Aviv University. Thank you so much for coming in today and talking to us about this.
Thank you.
الله مكبر غلاك ينبض بحبك فؤادي من يشبهك يا ملاك من يشبهك يا وداد